The boutique thrived in an atmosphere of quiet elegance, where the soft hum of instrumental music blended seamlessly with the low murmurs of shoppers admiring designer clothing. The warm lighting reflected off shimmering gowns, creating an almost dreamlike ambiance. Among the customers that afternoon was Savannah Whitmore, a poised 18-year-old with a keen eye for fashion and a deep appreciation for style. She had entered Belle Co., one of the most exclusive boutiques in Willow Creek, eager to find the perfect dress for her father's upcoming charity gala. The annual event was one of the most anticipated gatherings in the city, and Savannah wanted a look that would reflect both her confidence and grace. For Savannah, shopping at Belle Co. was more than just a routine trip. It was an experience, a milestone. She had often accompanied her father, Nathan Whitmore, a widely respected entrepreneur known for owning several luxury retail chains across the state. But today marked a significant first. She was shopping alone. With her father away on business, Savannah relished the newfound independence of making her own choices. Her fingers skimmed the fine fabrics draped elegantly over the racks. Every dress was a masterpiece. Intricate lacework, delicate embroidery, and exquisite beading that caught the light with every movement. She smiled as she held a navy blue gown against herself, its flowing silhouette both timeless and elegant. The price tag, irrelevant. She could afford it, and she knew it. But just as she turned to search for her size, a strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck. Someone was watching her. Across the boutique, Evelyn Drake, a longtime customer known for her entitled attitude, narrowed her gaze in thinly veiled disapproval. She had been shopping at Belle Co. for years and considered it an establishment meant for people of status. To her, Savannah didn't belong. At first, she merely observed, but soon she began following. Savannah remained blissfully unaware of the scrutiny. She moved to another rack, admiring a sleek black cocktail dress with intricate pearl detailing, her mind focused only on the evening ahead. Evelyn, however, had already made up her mind. She leaned in toward another shopper, whispering just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I bet she's not even here to buy anything," she sneered, shaking her head. Her hushed yet pointed remark reached the ears of Janet Lawson, the boutique's manager. Though Janet had only been working there for a few months, she had already grown familiar with Evelyn's presence. The woman was a regular, one of those customers who demanded attention and expected to be catered to without question. But today, there was something sharper in Evelyn's tone. There was accusation. Savannah picked up another dress, unaware of the growing tension. But Evelyn had decided she had seen enough. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she marched toward the store manager, her voice low but urgent. "I need to speak with you," she said, pointing discreetly toward Savannah. Janet hesitated, puzzled by the woman's sudden urgency. "That girl," Evelyn hissed, her voice drenched in manufactured concern. "I saw her slip something into her bag. She's acting suspiciously." The accusation hit like a shockwave. Nearby shoppers paused mid-conversation, their gazes flickering toward Savannah. Savannah, who had just picked up a stunning red gown, felt the shift. A wave of discomfort rolled over her as she turned toward the source of the commotion. Her eyes locked with Evelyn's, and in an instant she understood exactly what was happening. The unfounded accusation landed like a gut punch, knocking the breath out of her. She had done nothing wrong. Yet now she was being accused. And Evelyn wasn't done yet. She turned back to Janet, her expression expectant, as if her words should have immediate consequences. "You need to check her bag, now." Savannah's fingers tightened around the fabric of the dress in her hands. For a moment she was frozen, caught between disbelief and frustration. She had encountered rudeness before, sideways glances, condescending tones, but this was something different. The boutique's once inviting atmosphere had thickened with tension. Savannah could feel the stares. She was no longer just another shopper. She was a suspect. And now she had a choice to make. Would she stay silent and let them treat her like a criminal, or would she stand up for herself? With a deep, steadying breath, Savannah made her decision. Her voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable strength. "I haven't done anything wrong, but if checking my bag will end this nonsense, go ahead." She held out her handbag, her pulse pounding as every set of eyes in the store bore into her. Janet hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the bag. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a routine misunderstanding. She carefully unzipped it, her fingers searching through the contents. The room was so silent, the faint rustling of fabric felt deafening. Customers held their breath. Janet glanced up, her face pale. Then she shook her head. "There's nothing here," she said quietly, her tone bordering on apologetic. But Evelyn wasn't satisfied. "Check again," she demanded, her voice rising. "She must have hidden it somewhere else." Savannah's stomach churned, her hands curling into fists at her sides. She had never felt humiliation like this before, and she knew without a doubt this wasn't about shoplifting. This was about her. This was about prejudice. And Savannah Whitmore wasn't going to let it slide. The once lively boutique, filled with soft music and the rustle of shopping bags, now felt suffocating. The air was thick with tension, and all eyes were on her. The other customers, once lost in their own shopping, had stopped in their tracks. Their gazes darted between Savannah and Evelyn, curiosity and discomfort reflected in their eyes. What had started as a simple shopping trip had turned into something ugly, and Savannah was suddenly the center of it all. She stood firm, refusing to shrink under the weight of the moment. Her heart pounded, but her expression remained composed, her back straight, her chin high. She had nothing to hide. And yet, here she was, being treated like a criminal. Janet Lawson, the boutique's manager, cleared her throat. Her hand still gripped Savannah's bag, her fingers trembling slightly. She had taken this job expecting to handle customer service, inventory, and styling recommendations, not to referee public accusations. Her gaze flickered between Evelyn and Savannah as she struggled to regain control of the situation. "I've checked the bag," Janet said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's nothing in it." But Evelyn wasn't ready to back down. Her fingers clenched around the handle of her designer purse, her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. "Check again," she snapped, her voice sharp and demanding. "People like her know how to hide things." Savannah had had enough. A slow breath filled her lungs, steadying her resolve before she took a deliberate step forward, locking eyes with Evelyn. "I think we're done here," Savannah said, her tone firm but controlled. "Unless you have actual proof, I suggest you stop harassing me." Evelyn's mouth twitched, but before she could fire back, Janet stepped in. "Maybe we should all take a step back and calm down," she suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Evelyn ignored her completely, her eyes flashing with something sharper, more poisonous. She turned back to Janet with the confidence of someone who had always gotten her way. "Girls like her don't belong in stores like this," she spat. "They come in, cause trouble, and leave with things that don't belong to them." A stunned silence filled the boutique. The words hung in the air like an echo, cold and undeniable. A few customers gasped softly, others shifted uncomfortably, glancing away, pretending not to hear, but fully aware of what had just been said. Savannah's jaw tightened. A sharp sting settled deep in her chest, but she refused to let it break her. She had faced rudeness before, side glances, condescending tones, people making assumptions about her. But this was different. This was an open attempt to degrade her, to strip her of dignity. But Evelyn had underestimated her. "You're not just wrong," Savannah said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're showing everyone exactly who you are, and it's not a good look." Evelyn scoffed, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She turned to Janet, demanding with a wave of her manicured hand, "We don't need troublemakers ruining this place, just ask her to leave." Janet hesitated. Her eyes flickered between Evelyn, red-faced and furious, and Savannah, composed but clearly hurt. The decision weighed on her, balancing between keeping an influential customer happy and doing what was right. Finally she exhaled, her shoulders sinking slightly. "I think it's best if you leave," Janet said, her voice softer than before, as if lowering the volume would soften the impact of the words. "We don't want any more disruptions." Savannah felt the words land like a punch to the gut. Her heart pounded in her chest, disbelief settling in as she searched Janet's face for any sign of hesitation, any sign that she would take it back. "You're asking me to leave?" Savannah asked slowly, as if saying it aloud would make it make sense. "Even though I've done nothing wrong?" From the corner of her eye she caught Evelyn's smirk, the satisfaction in her eyes, the triumph written across her face. "Exactly," Evelyn said, crossing her arms smugly. "You're just proving my point." Savannah inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay composed. The weight of the moment settled into her bones, the injustice of it simmering just beneath the surface. But she wouldn't crumble, she refused. If Evelyn thought she could push her out, if Janet believed it was easier to ask her to leave than to stand up to a woman like Evelyn, they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. She refused to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, Savannah squared her shoulders, lifting her chin as she met Evelyn's gaze head-on. Her voice was clear, steady, and filled with quiet strength. "You're only doing this because of the color of my skin." The boutique fell silent. The accusation was undeniable, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Customers exchanged uneasy glances, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Even Janet, who had remained hesitant throughout the ordeal, shifted uncomfortably, her face paling as the weight of Savannah's words hit her. For the first time, Evelyn faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, but she quickly recovered, masking her unease with a scoff. "I'm just protecting the store's reputation," she said, though the confidence in her voice wavered. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The reality of what had just transpired was sinking in, not just for Evelyn, but for everyone in the boutique. Murmurs rippled through the store. Some customers exchanged knowing glances, while others outright shook their heads in disappointment. The air of judgment had shifted, and this time it wasn't on Savannah. Still, she stood tall, unshaken, refusing to let the sting of injustice weigh her down. She could have walked away then, let them push her out and pretend she didn't belong. But she wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until she proved them all wrong. Without breaking eye contact, she reached into her pocket and calmly pulled out her phone. "Dad," she said, her voice strong, carrying through the hushed boutique. "I need you to come to Belle Co. There's a situation here." Evelyn rolled her eyes dramatically, exhaling in frustration. "Oh, how dramatic," she muttered under her breath. Then, with a smug smirk, she leaned toward a nearby customer. "Probably calling her boyfriend to bail her out," she whispered, her tone dripping with mockery. The customer frowned, clearly uncomfortable with Evelyn's words, shifting away from her. But Evelyn, oblivious to the shifting tide, continued. "This is why stores like this need stricter policies. We can't just let anyone walk in." Savannah didn't flinch. She simply ended the call, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Her expression remained unreadable, calm. Because she knew something Evelyn didn't. She knew that in just a few moments everything was about to change. And Evelyn Drake was about to be absolutely speechless. Evelyn Drake stood with her arms crossed, a smug smirk playing on her lips as she watched the store manager hesitate. The manager was torn, caught between appeasing an influential customer and acknowledging the growing unease among the other shoppers. Evelyn had made a scene, and she reveled in it. This was exactly what she wanted. She needed everyone to see that she controlled the boutique's atmosphere, that she decided who belonged and who didn't. And in her mind, Savannah Whitmore certainly didn't. Yet, despite the humiliation pressing down on her, Savannah remained composed. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly why this was happening. This wasn't about boutique policies or any real suspicion of theft. This was about who she was and how she looked. But she refused to let Evelyn's scrutiny crush her. Instead, she met her accuser's gaze with unwavering strength, gripping her phone tightly as she pressed a single button. "Dad, I need you to come to the boutique," Savannah said, her voice steady, betraying none of the frustrations simmering just beneath the surface. Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, how predictable. Calling for backup? Maybe your little boyfriend can come straighten this out for you." She turned to a nearby customer and scoffed. "This is exactly why places like this need stricter policies. We just let anyone walk in and this is what happens." Her words hung in the air, thick with disdain. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. The store manager fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Savannah and Evelyn, realizing she had let things escalate far beyond her control. Some customers who had been pretending to browse now blatantly watched the confrontation unfold. A few exchanged hushed whispers, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to something else entirely: discomfort, disapproval. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the low rumble of an engine broke the silence. The sound grew louder, more distinct, the deep, commanding hum of a luxury vehicle rolling up to the curb. Through the boutique's glass doors, the reflection of a sleek black SUV came into view. Its tinted windows gleamed under the afternoon sun, exuding an air of power and authority. Before anyone inside could react, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, not just any man, Nathan Whitmore. The moment he emerged, the boutique seemed to pause. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he carried himself with effortless confidence. His presence alone commanded attention. His polished shoes clicked purposefully against the pavement as he strode toward the entrance. Inside, the store manager stiffened at the sight of him. The staff, some of whom recognized him immediately, suddenly straightened, their demeanor shifting from casual to professional in an instant. Evelyn, however, remained blissfully unaware of the change in energy. "Oh, great," she muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. "Another concerned parent here to make excuses." The glass doors swung open. First, a bodyguard stepped inside, his sharp gaze sweeping over the boutique as if assessing potential threats. His mere presence sent a clear message. Nathan Whitmore never moved without control. Then Nathan himself entered. His piercing eyes scanned the store, taking in the hushed customers, the visibly anxious manager, and finally his daughter, standing at the center of it all. "Mr. Whitmore," the store manager nearly stumbled over her own words, her face flushing as she hurried forward. "We weren't expecting you today." Nathan didn't acknowledge her. His attention was locked onto Savannah, who stood her ground, her arms crossed in quiet defiance. His daughter, strong, composed, and refusing to back down in the face of injustice. Without looking away from her, Nathan's voice cut through the tension like steel. "Would someone like to explain what's going on here?" Evelyn, still oblivious to the reality of the situation, folded her arms and smiled in smug satisfaction. She turned to Nathan, convinced that he would take her side. "Oh, I'm so glad someone's here to deal with this mess," she said, gesturing toward Savannah with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Your daughter has been causing trouble. I caught her acting suspiciously, and I'm pretty sure she tried to steal something." Nathan remained expressionless. He didn't react, not in anger, not in shock. Instead, he turned to the store manager, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Is that true?" The manager hesitated, a bead of sweat forming at her temple. She shifted nervously under his sharp gaze. Well, Mrs. Drake did bring some concerns to my attention," she stammered, "but we checked her bag and there was nothing in it." Nathan's gaze didn't waver. His voice was controlled, but the tension in the air was suffocating. "Then what exactly are we doing here?" Before the manager could answer, Evelyn scoffed, crossing her arms tighter over her chest. "That doesn't mean she wasn't planning to take something," she said, her arrogance unshaken. She gave a dramatic shrug, her voice laced with condescension. "People like her are good at hiding things." The room fell into complete silence. Every customer, every staff member froze. The weight of Evelyn's words hung in the air, thick and damning. Nathan's expression remained unreadable. but the slightest shift in his stance sent an undeniable message. People like her? His voice, though quiet, cut through the air like a blade. Evelyn's confidence flickered. She swallowed hard, suddenly sensing she had miscalculated. "You know what I mean," she muttered, though her voice lacked its previous force. "This store is for respectable clients, and she clearly doesn't fit the profile." Nathan let the words settle, allowing the full impact of her prejudice to hang over the room like a storm cloud. Then, with precise control, he stepped forward, his towering frame now mere inches from Evelyn. "This girl you're accusing," he said, his voice ice-cold, "is my daughter." A collective gasp rippled through the boutique. For a moment it was as if time itself had stopped. Customers exchanged stunned glances. The staff, their expressions now a mixture of discomfort and guilt, stood rigid in place. But the most visceral reaction came from Evelyn. Her entire body stiffened, her expression contorting in disbelief. She blinked, her smug demeanor collapsing in an instant. What?" she whispered, barely able to form the word. Nathan didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The truth had already shattered every assumption she had so carelessly thrown around. Evelyn's confidence crumbled. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Savannah stood firm beside her father, her posture strong, her silence louder than anything Evelyn could have said. Nathan's piercing gaze remained locked on Evelyn. "You judged her without cause," he said, his tone unwavering. "You humiliated her in front of everyone here, and for what? Because of your own prejudice?" The atmosphere shifted. Murmurs spread among the customers, their whispers growing louder. Some nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with disapproval. Others looked at Evelyn with thinly veiled disgust. For the first time, Evelyn realized she was completely alone. Nathan turned his attention to the store manager. His expression didn't soften. "And you," he said, his voice low but firm. "You stood by and let this happen. You allowed my daughter to be harassed in your store. Why?" The manager swallowed, her throat dry. Her hands trembled slightly as she struggled for an answer. "I didn't know," she whispered weakly. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have to know." Nathan's voice was like ice. "You didn't know she was my daughter? She shouldn't have to be." Evelyn visibly trembled, her once smug confidence now completely shattered. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, and for the first time, she had nothing to say. Nathan exhaled sharply, his decision already made. "You're banned from this store," he said, his voice firm and final. "And every other boutique I own?" Evelyn's face drained of color. The reality of what had just happened set in, and with nothing left to say, she turned and fled, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she rushed toward the door. A heavy silence filled the boutique. The quiet hum of background music played on, now feeling strangely out of place. The customers, the staff, everyone stood frozen, still digesting the stunning revelation that had just turned everything on its head. Evelyn Drake, the self-proclaimed elite shopper, had just humiliated herself in the worst possible way. Savannah Whitmore, the girl she had so quickly judged and falsely accused, now stood tall beside her father. Nathan Whitmore, a man whose reputation carried weight throughout the city. Savannah hadn't needed to yell, argue, or plead her case. The truth had spoken for itself. The store manager, Janet, shifted nervously, her gaze darting between Nathan and the boutique staff as if searching for a way out of the uncomfortable situation. But there was no escape from what had happened. Nathan turned his sharp, assessing gaze onto her, and she swallowed hard. "You stood by and let this happen," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "You didn't ask for proof, you didn't stop to think, you just assumed she was right. Because of who she is." Janet's cheeks burned as she fumbled for an excuse. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know she was your daughter," she stammered, her voice laced with desperation. Nathan let out a slow, measured breath before replying. "That's exactly the problem. Would she have been treated differently if you had known? If so, then you need to ask yourself what that says about this store's values." Savannah stood quietly beside her father, processing everything. Relief washed over her, knowing the ordeal was over, but a deeper thought nagged at her. How many others had been treated the same way? People who didn't have someone powerful to step in and expose the truth. Finally, a voice cut through the silence. "About time someone put that woman in her place," an older woman with silver hair murmured. She adjusted her purse and shook her head. "I've seen her pull stunts like this before. Guess today she finally messed with the wrong person." A ripple of agreement spread through the boutique. Customers exchanged glances, some nodding, others whispering among themselves. A man in a tailored suit crossed his arms. "Honestly, I was waiting for someone to stop her," he admitted. "We should all be ashamed it took this long." The tide had turned. Evelyn's influence, once so powerful, had crumbled. The boutique staff, sensing the shift, looked uneasy. No one wanted to be associated with Evelyn's behavior anymore. Nathan, never one to waste time, turned back to Janet. "This store carries my name," he said, his voice unwavering. "If this is the kind of treatment people receive here, I'll make sure it never happens again. Understood?" Janet nodded rapidly. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore, I understand. I swear this will never happen again." Nathan studied her, as if deciding whether her words were genuine. Then, without another word, he turned to Savannah. "Are you ready to go?" Savannah nodded, holding herself together despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. As they walked toward the exit, Janet scrambled behind them, her voice rising in desperation. "Mr. Whitmore, please! If there's anything I can do to make this right." Nathan didn't slow his stride. "You already know what to do," he said simply. With that, he and Savannah stepped out into the warm afternoon sun. Outside, the black SUV was already waiting at the curb. The bodyguard, ever alert, pulled open the door, nodding as Savannah climbed inside. Nathan followed, settling into the driver's seat. For a long moment, there was silence. Savannah exhaled, staring out the window, watching as the boutique slowly faded from view. Nathan finally spoke, his tone softer now. "You handled yourself well in there." Savannah turned to him, surprised. "I didn't really do much." "You didn't let her get to you," he said. "You didn't let her make you feel small. That takes strength." Savannah processed his words. She had stood her ground. She had refused to let Evelyn define her. But even so, something still lingered inside her. "This kind of thing happens all the time," she murmured. "To people who don't have someone like you to step in." Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I know," he admitted, "and that's exactly why it's important to fight back, not just for yourself, but for the ones who don't have a voice." Savannah nodded, her resolve growing. As the SUV pulled away, she made a silent promise to herself. This wouldn't be the last time she stood up for what was right. And the next time someone like Evelyn tried to use their power to put someone else down, Savannah Whitmore would be ready. Nathan turned to Savannah, his voice softer now. "I'm proud of you." Savannah blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "For what?" "For standing up for yourself," he said, "for not letting someone like that break you." She managed a faint smile, feeling the weight of the entire ordeal slowly lifting from her shoulders. "Thanks, Dad." Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable as he reached for his phone. He had business to handle, calls to make, ensuring that Evelyn Drake would never set foot in any of his boutiques again. Savannah exhaled, finally beginning to relax. But just as she settled into her seat, her phone vibrated against her palm. She glanced at the screen, expecting a message from a friend or perhaps a check-in from a relative. But instead, her breath hitched. An unknown number. A single text message. "Be careful who you embarrass. Some people don't forgive so easily." Her fingers tightened around the device, a chill creeping up her spine. Nathan, always attuned to his daughter's emotions, immediately noticed the shift in her expression. His brows furrowed as he turned toward her. "What is it?" Wordlessly, Savannah flipped the phone around, showing him the message. His jaw clenched. The tension in the car thickened as he took the phone from her, his grip firm yet controlled. His eyes scanned the words, once, twice, then again. Savannah's heart pounded. Was this from Evelyn or someone else? Nathan's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable steel edge to it. "You don't respond to this." She swallowed hard. "Do you think she—" "We don't assume anything," Nathan interrupted, his tone unwavering, "but we don't ignore it either." His gaze flicked to the bodyguard, who had already been watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Without missing a beat, Nathan handed him the phone. "Trace the number," Nathan ordered. "Find out where it came from, and if there's anything else I need to know, tell me immediately." The bodyguard, a seasoned professional who had worked with Nathan for years, nodded once and pulled out his own phone, already working to track the origin of the text. Savannah's pulse raced. Just moments ago, she had thought the worst of this was over. She had faced Evelyn Drake, endured the humiliation, and walked out with her dignity intact. But this wasn't just about a public confrontation. This was something else entirely. The boutique had been about prejudice and power. This message? It was a warning. Nathan clenched his jaw, his protective instincts roaring to life. Someone out there was angry. Someone wasn't willing to let this go. And he would make sure they never got the chance. Savannah stared out the window, watching as the city lights flickered past them. Her mind swirled with possibilities, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nathan placed a firm but reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Listen to me, Savannah. No one threatens you and gets away with it. We'll handle this." But even as he spoke, she could see the tension in his jaw, the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. The SUV pulled into the private driveway of their estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by high-security gates and cameras. Yet, despite the layers of protection, Savannah still didn't feel completely safe. As soon as they stepped inside, Nathan's phone rang. He answered immediately, his voice sharp and commanding. "What do you have?" In another part of the house, the bodyguard stood in a secured room with the security team. His voice came through the speakerphone quickly. The number was a burner phone, no name attached, but we traced its last known location. It pinged off a cell tower near downtown, not far from where Evelyn Drake lives. Nathan's expression remained impassive, but Savannah knew exactly what that meant. Evelyn wasn't just humiliated. She was angry, and she wasn't finished. Nathan exhaled slowly, his voice firm as he gave his next order. "Keep digging. I want to know exactly where she is right now. If she even looks in Savannah's direction again, I want to be the first to know." Savannah swallowed hard. "Dad, do you really think she'd—" Nathan turned to her, his eyes filled with unwavering resolve. "I don't take chances when it comes to your safety, sweetheart, and neither should you." She nodded, but deep down she knew this wasn't over. The next morning, Savannah tried to push aside the unease still lingering from the night before. She refused to live in fear. She had faced Evelyn once, and if she had to, she would do it again. But that didn't mean she would be careless. Sitting in the sunlit kitchen, sipping coffee, she turned as her father entered. His expression was unreadable. "I made a few calls," Nathan said, setting his phone down on the counter. "Turns out Evelyn Drake is more desperate than I thought." Savannah frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "Word travels fast. She's been calling around trying to get people to side with her." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "Side with her? After what she did?" Nathan smirked, though there was no humor in it. "People like her don't see themselves as the villain, Savannah. They twist the truth. In her version, she's the victim, wronged by a spoiled rich girl who got her kicked out of her favorite boutique." Savannah let out a frustrated breath. "So now what? She tries to ruin my name?" Nathan's expression hardened. "Let her try. She'll find out soon enough that she picked the wrong family to mess with." A surge of relief washed over Savannah, but it was short-lived. Because at that moment, Nathan's phone buzzed again. His eyes flicked to the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. "Security just called. he said, his tone unreadable. Savannah sat up straighter, her instincts immediately on high alert. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Nathan hesitated for only a second before delivering the news. "Evelyn just showed up at one of my stores." Savannah blinked, barely able to process what she had just heard. "Wait, what? She actually walked into one of your stores after everything that happened?" Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "And she's making a scene." That was all Savannah needed to hear. She was already pushing back her chair, rising to her feet with a sense of urgency. "We have to go." Nathan studied her carefully, measuring her reaction. "Are you sure?" Savannah didn't hesitate. "I'm sure." This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about accountability. Evelyn Drake had spent years using her wealth and status to belittle and mistreat people she deemed unworthy. She had never been held responsible. Until now. Savannah wasn't going to let her get away with it again. When they arrived at the boutique, the scene was exactly what they had expected. Evelyn Drake stood in the center of the store, her arms crossed, her face twisted in frustration. Her presence demanded attention, yet the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Several customers and employees watched from the sidelines, shifting uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond to her outburst. But none dared to approach her. Savannah stepped inside first, her father following close behind. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the quiet boutique, drawing Evelyn's attention. The moment she saw them, her expression shifted. But it wasn't embarrassment or regret that flickered across her face. It was defiance. "Well, well," Evelyn sneered, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "If it isn't the Whitmores, come to gloat?" Savannah crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. "No, Evelyn. Just wondering why you're standing in the middle of a store that you were banned from." Ellen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Banned? Oh, please, do you really think I care about that? I have friends in high places. I can shop anywhere I want." Nathan stepped forward, his presence alone commanding the room. "Not in my stores you can't," he said firmly. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she quickly masked it. Savannah tilted her head. "Why are you here, Evelyn?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I came to let you know that you can't humiliate me and expect me to just disappear. I built my reputation in this town, and I won't let some entitled brat ruin it." Savannah felt her anger simmer, but she refused to let it take control. Instead, she met Evelyn's gaze, her voice as calm and steady as ever. "You humiliated yourself. No one forced you to act the way you did. You judged me. You accused me of stealing. You tried to have me thrown out. That was all you." Evelyn's nostrils flared. "I was protecting the store." Nathan let out a slow, deliberate breath. "No, you were protecting your own prejudices," he corrected. "And now, you're facing the consequences." Evelyn's gaze darted around the boutique, as if searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But the customers and employees who had once been too intimidated to speak up now remained silent, their expressions making it clear they wanted no part of her tantrum. She was truly, completely alone. Nathan took another step forward, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You should leave, Evelyn, before you embarrass yourself any further." For a long moment, Evelyn remained frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a sharp inhale, she turned on her heel. But just before stepping through the door, she cast one final glance at Savannah, her eyes filled with bitter resentment. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice laced with venom. Savannah didn't blink. She met Evelyn's glare head-on, her voice unwavering. "Yes, it is." And with that, Evelyn Drake walked out of the store for the last time. The boutique was quiet, as if the entire room had been holding its breath. Savannah exhaled slowly, finally releasing the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Nathan stood beside her, watching as the door shut behind Evelyn. "This won't be the last time someone like her tries to pull something like this," Savannah murmured. Nathan nodded. "No, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting." Savannah smiled, a quiet but determined fire in her eyes. "Then I guess I'd better be ready." Nathan smirked. "You already are." As they stepped outside, the sun shone brighter than it had all day, a warmth settling over Savannah as she walked beside her father. Justice had been served. But this wasn't just about Evelyn Drake. It was bigger than that. This was about standing up when others tried to push you down. This was about refusing to let people get away with their cruelty just because they thought they could. Savannah had learned something important that day. Silence enables the oppressor, but courage silences them. As they drove home, Savannah gazed out the window, reflecting on everything that had happened. She knew that her privilege had helped her stand up to Evelyn, but she also understood that many people faced similar prejudice without having powerful allies to defend them. "Dad," she said quietly as they pulled into their driveway, "I want to do more." Nathan glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "I want to create spaces where everyone is treated with respect," she continued, "where people like Evelyn can't just get away with treating others poorly." Nathan smiled, pride evident in his expression. "That sounds like a worthy goal." Savannah nodded, her resolve strengthening. This confrontation had opened her eyes to a larger purpose, one that extended far beyond a single incident in a boutique. She would use her voice, her privilege, and her determination to make a difference. And the next time she witnessed injustice, she wouldn't need her father to step in. She would be ready to stand on her own.